Welcome back to Indiana at the Voice of College Football for our 13th edition of Indiana Hoosiers Live. And it's a big one because we've got the CFP matchup on the way between Indiana and Notre Dame. This game right here, in my opinion, can be argued to be the best first round opening college football playoff game with the 12-team playoff. Tennessee-Ohio State is also a fantastic game as well. But when you look at this game, you've got two teams in the same state of Indiana, and battling for supremacy, because it sure wasn't Purdue this year. Purdue had a terrible year at 1-11, but Indiana and Notre Dame both had fantastic seasons. Both teams only suffered one loss, with Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois in surprising fashion, whereas they won all the rest of their games pretty dominantly. And Indiana was the other way around, where they blew out everybody that they played, except Michigan, who they also beat, but then they lost to Ohio State fairly comfortably. Now it's all coming down to this game and who can advance to be able to play Georgia in the next round of the college football playoff, which both teams actually think if they win this game will have a chance, because Georgia has some injuries going on and Georgia's looked more vulnerable this year. A lot of games they've barely won. So this is a big game. A lot of stakes on the line, a lot of storylines to be talked about as well, and cannot wait to get into this episode of Indiana Hoosiers Live, as we got a lot to talk about and looking forward to it. Appreciate everybody for being here. If you are new to the show, if you are a Hoosier fan, or even not, if you're not a Hoosier fan, it doesn't matter what team you are a fan of. If you are watching, appreciate if you guys subscribe if you're new, if you're enjoying the show, like the stream down below, and share the stream out on social media. Get more Hoosier fans and more college football fans to Indiana at the Voice of College Football. We are here usually at 7 o'clock on Tuesday nights. Unfortunately, had some, stuff going on. Christmas season's coming around the corner. It's a busy time of year, so we're doing a little bit later tonight, but do appreciate you guys for being here. But it's going to be a big game with Indiana and Notre Dame. But before we get into this game later on the show, we do have some things to talk about first, like Curt Cignetti being the AP Coach of the Year. He already won Big Ten Coach of the Year, and he's gotten a lot of coaching awards this season, and it's absolutely well-deserved. But now he's the Walter Camp Foundation Coach of the Year and also the AP Coach of the Year, which to me signifies that he was the best coach in college football this season. Out of all the coaches in college football, compared to preseason expectations and what they ended up doing at the end of the season, I don't think that there was any coach that took over a team or has been with a team for a while and they just had low expectations coming into the season, where most people were expecting Indiana to go 4-8 or 3-9 or even 5-7 at the very best. And a few people like me that had even making bowl eligibility would have thought that Indiana would be 11-1. And even though some people are saying the schedule and all that, Indiana, yeah, they've had a lot of tough schedules recently, but in the past they've had years where their schedule wasn't the worst, but their team just wasn't that good, so they didn't win games. This team's different. Yeah, their schedule wasn't the hardest in college football by no means, but they have way outperformed preseason expectations, and it's all because of this man. In his first year as the Indiana Hoosiers head coach, wins Coach of the Year by all the major outlets. Kenny Dillingham had a case, and I talked about this last week with Mark, the voice of college football himself. It was a great show. Definitely check out that show if you missed it, because we talked about a lot that has to do with this Indiana-Notre Dame game coming up as well. But even he said it was close, but Kenny Dillingham, he was there at Arizona State last year, already had a year under his belt, and the Big 12 is not as tough of a conference as the Big 10. Arizona State's schedule was a little bit tougher, and he did win the Big 12, which was very impressive. Don't get me wrong. I think Kenny Dillingham deserves a lot of props for what he's done this season, but I don't think there's any question that Curt Cignetti should have won Coach of the Year, and the voters did the right thing on all across the board on all these different, votes that have taken place, all these different awards for Coach of the Year, and Curt Cignetti is just winning all of them. He's wiping up the board. He's wiping up the floor with all of the awards, and it's just deserved. I mean, Indiana, it cannot be over or understated how bad that they've been as a program historically. And yeah, they had the brief moment in time with Michael Penix and Tom Allen where they were relevant, but it still just felt different. Then this feels, it's a completely new, beast. It's a completely new animal. seeing Indiana being 11-1. And now in the first year of the CFP, they're in the playoffs. I mean, there's a lot of great programs out there, quality programs with a lot of history that have still never made the college football playoff. I mean, you're talking about teams like, Texas A&M or Florida, just a lot of quality programs out there that have not made the playoffs yet. Indiana's made the playoffs first. It's unbelievable. I would have never expected Curt Cignetti to take Indiana to the college football playoff. And I know that a 12-team playoff kind of does lessen the impact of how impressive it is of making the playoff. Like when you made a 4-team playoff, that was like entering royalty, right? Like only 4 teams out of everybody in college football gets in. Now it's 12. It's not as big of a deal. So a lot of teams that made it only when it was a 14 playoff are still going to say that was way more impressive and that this isn't as impressive. But at the same time, I just think that at a program like Indiana, where their all-time record is around 40%, which basically rounds out to 5-7 every single year, that's expected at Indiana to make the college football playoff, even in a 12-team iteration, is so impressive. And it was in his first season as the coach. It's not like, Curt Cignetti's been in Indiana for 5 or 6 years and he finally had a lightning in the bottle season. This is Indiana's first year with Curt Cignetti. That's what makes it even crazier. Dillingham was in his second year at Arizona State. And by all accounts, if Curt Cignetti did not have the insane season that he had in Indiana this year with how well he did flipping Indiana from 3-9 last year to 11-1 this year in a playoff bid, Kenny Dillingham would have won Coach of the Year. No doubt about it. Most seasons, or even like Deion Sanders, maybe something like that, would have had a shot at it. Dan Lanning maybe could have won it because he's been impressive. But I mean, Dan Lanning's been at Oregon for a while, and Oregon is a program that most people deem among the higher echelon in college football. I mean, they're not like Ohio State or Alabama or anything, but Oregon is still, a pretty good program, even if a lot of their success does have to do with Phil Knight and Nike. It doesn't matter. I mean, they still have won in the past. They've had success in the past, and they've been a part of the national championship conversation in the past. Indiana has never been in that conversation. Even Arizona State, with their history not being nowhere near the elites of college football, has had some success in the past. So, I mean, this is just a completely new thing for Indiana. I mean, in their 100 and over 20 years of college football, this was their first season where they can win a national title. I mean, all the other seasons that they've had, they've never had a shot to win a national title. Even in their 2 best seasons in 1945 and 1967, the best they could do is win the Rose Bowl, which I know the Rose Bowl is very prestigious, but it's still not a national championship. This is a completely new deal for Indiana, and Curt Cignetti getting them there, it's just so impressive. I still honestly just cannot believe how impressive it has been. I mean, I watched this year. I watched every single game, and I've been watching Indiana football since around 2016, 2017. I really started watching them more in 2018, but I've watched every game since 2018. I watched them some in 2016, 2017. That's when I started, delving into Indiana football, because I always was an Alabama fan in the past, and I still will always be an Alabama football fan. But I started watching Indiana. They just never won anything. Everybody always was talking trash about the Hoosiers. I don't know. I just started watching them and developed an interest in the team and began to, root for them, even though I knew that they were perennial losers. And I thought that the best that Indiana could ever achieve would be like an 8-4 season, a 7-5 season at best. And when Tom Allen achieved that, I was blown away. I'm like, wow, Indiana can win. But now Curt Cignetti is showing that any program can win. Now, is it sustainable? I don't know. I have no idea. I think it can be, because of the fact with the portal and NIL, a lot of this stuff, ironically enough, it's starting to seem like it's benefiting. It's going in Indiana's favor, which is kind of shocking, because when you look at the fact that in the past, when you had some programs doing things under the table that they shouldn't have been doing, and we know that a lot of programs were doing that, and it was skirting under the NCAA, that was helping them get players that, that built up their franchise, organizations, and programs, and made them great. But then after that, you started to see, a shift where it was more in the open, and some programs were getting in trouble for it, but some weren't. but it was the big schools, like teams like Indiana, it's just like, oh, they can never compete. Well, now that NIL is out in the open, and now that you're seeing these Big Ten media rights deals and SEC media rights, and all this kind of stuff, TV deals, all these deals going out there to these programs, and it is seemingly leveling the playing field. Donors are involved. Indiana has got tons of donors. They got tons of rich alumni, massive alumni base, and so much money is being filtered into the program now. And you're seeing a difference. Curt Cignetti getting the biggest contract in Indiana school history during the season of $8 million a year moving forward. You're getting a massive pool of money for assistant coaches, and it looks like Indiana is going to keep every single assistant coach outside of Tino Sunsery, who's going to UCLA. That's a tough loss. Going to have to replace him at quarterbacks coach. But other than that, it looks like everybody else is staying, which is massive. I mean, in years past, those guys would have been poached. There's no way that they would be staying at Indiana. But, like Kalen DeBoer, one good year, he's gone, right? That's the way it used to be. But now these guys are looking like they're going to stay longer, and Indiana's getting decent players. Like, they're not, 5-star guys. They're not guys that, are Heisman, candidates at the beginning of the season or anything like that. But they're guys that want to win. They're guys that have had success previously at lower schools. And Indiana's winning these recruitments. And look at this season, the Mikel Camaras, the Curtis Works. I mean, these guys, nobody even knew who they were unless you were an avid college football fan and knew Work from being at Ohio, and Camara, what he did at James Madison. Like, unless you didn't follow those schools, you don't know who they are. Cignetti brings these guys in, and now they're All-Americans. And we're going to get to that briefly. We're going to talk about some of the All-Americans that Indiana has been announced this week. But there's just no doubt in my mind that this man didn't deserve, Coach of the Year. He absolutely deserved Coach of the Year. And honestly, I mean, I understand, people, they have a right to their opinion, and sometimes an opinion, can be debated heavily to the point where, like, both people are right. Like there's always been arguments and conversations in the past where people will say, well, this person has good points, this person has good points. Both of you can be right. I just don't see it here. I don't see any debate where Curt Cignetti is not the Coach of the Year for this season. He was the best coach in college football this season based on the preseason expectations for a team and a program and what that program ended up with and ended up at the end of the season. There's nobody else that even comes close. Dillingham was the closest, but I don't even think it's that close. It's like this, not like this. It's not that tight. Cignetti did a fantastic job in Indiana. And like I said, no matter what happens in the future, because I know deep down some Hoosier fans are thinking that Indiana is going to be fantastic for years to come. Like it's a sure thing. It's a done deal that Indiana is going to be, fantastic, for the next however many years Cignetti is going to stay at IU or be a coach in college football. Like, because some people think that he could still leave for another program. I don't think so. I think he's going to stay in Bloomington for the long haul. Well, whether it's the rest of his contract, another 8 years, if it's 5 years, however long, I think he will. It doesn't mean they're going to have another year like this, or everything aligns. The schedule align, the players align, everything align, the coaches align. Because, as the years go by, Cignetti's not going to keep all these coordinators, even if you keep paying them. Look at even like Clemson. They kept paying Brent Venables a ton of money to stay. He eventually left. So, Indiana's going to lose Bryant Haynes. They're going to lose Mike Shanahan. They're going to lose some of these other assistant coaches eventually in future years. And maybe some transfers don't hit. Look at Florida State. They had good transfers in 2022, 2023, had winning years. And this past year was a disaster. They were terrible. I don't think Indiana's going to fall off like that. I don't think Cignetti is capable of going 2-10, honestly. I don't. But they could go 7-5 next year. And if they do, a lot of people are going to be disappointed. I won't be, because I'm still used to Indiana being the program that goes 4-8, 3-9, 5-7. That's what I'm used to. So even 7-5 next year would be good. It'd be one of the better seasons in Indiana's history. And people got to remember, this program hasn't won a bowl game since 1991. It's been that long. They still have not won a bowl game. So there's a lot of work to do to turn the stigma against this program and to being a respectable program. This one season doesn't do it. Even a playoff win. Look at TCU. TCU is a better program than Indiana historically. They have one good year where they end up, going out there and making the playoff and beating Michigan. They proved to people that they can win a big game in the playoffs. People said they didn't deserve to be in. They beat Michigan, but then that very next game, they went out there, got completely bludgeoned by Georgia, and they've never been heard from again. I mean, they had a decent season this year, but not a season that anybody really, writes home about among national media. Among local media in Texas, TCU had a fine season. I think they went like 8-4. But it's not a season that's going to make national headlines like Indiana's done this year. I mean, Indiana's had game day in town. They've had the big noon kickoff in town. They've had so much national coverage with Pat McAfee, Kurt Signetti going on his show. If they go 7-5 next year, Indiana's not going to have all that. They're not going to have all the national media looking at IU. You're going to have a lot of stories saying, well, Indiana's back to being kind of irrelevant again, which, again, I don't agree with. I still think a 7-5 season will be fantastic next year if that happens. But the point for this season and this season alone is that Signetti deserved Coach of the Year. He did an amazing job. And we're going to have to see what he does next season and beyond, whether he can somehow replicate this unbelievable success that Indiana had this year, or whether he's going to make Indiana at least a consistent program like Iowa, going 7-5, 8-4 every year. That would be good too. Or if they fall off a cliff and start having losing seasons. I don't see that scenario being the case. I really don't. I really believe with Signetti's track record and the man that he is, that he's determined and just he's not going to have his program losing, having losing seasons. But whatever happens this season, I will never forget. This was a fantastic season for Indiana football, a season that I didn't even think could be possible. And it is. And that should be a sign to other programs out there that it can be done with the right investment in football. And honestly, just being completely honest, in the Big Ten and the SEC, it's going to be a little bit easier to do that. It's going to be a lot harder to do that in the Big 12 and the ACC now that the amount of money that those teams are making in those conferences is a lot less. It's going to be harder to win at a high level like Indiana is doing in the Big Ten. It's going to be a lot harder to do that. I mean, you've seen Vanderbilt do better. I don't know if that's sustainable either. But if the Big 12 and AC can up their money somehow, maybe. But if you're in the Big Ten and the SEC, if you commit to football and you hire the right coach, any program can win in these conferences. That definitely has been proven with Indiana's success this year. Definitely, Signetti deserves Coach of the Year by far. And then looking at Hoosier All-Americans quickly, D'Angelo Pons and Aiden Fisher on the All-America team. You had Fisher at first team and Pons at second team. And you also have Mikel Kamara being named third team All-American. I mean, honestly, I just think that showcases that Indiana was a very good team this year. Even though these guys at the beginning of the season had no fanfare, nobody thought anything of these guys. I mean, I remember reading a preseason article or whatever with talking about Indiana's team, and like they said, Mikel Kamara, like, oh yeah, he was good at the Sun Belt level, but him going to the Big Ten, he's got an undersized frame. He's going to really struggle in the Big Ten. He's not going to have probably as much success, but only time will tell. Kind of one of those articles. And then Mikel Kamara goes out there and he leads the Big Ten in pressures. He leads the Big Ten in sacks. And that narrative just goes out the window. You look at a guy like Aiden Fisher. I mean, he was unbelievable. I mean, he was like third the Big Ten in tackles, led the Big Ten in a lot of areas as well. And ironically, Indiana's been very good with getting linebackers anyway. The past few years, even with Tom Allen, I mean, you had Micah McFadden, you had, Aaron Casey, tons of really solid players, Cam Jones as well. Middle linebackers has been Indiana's forte, and that continues over with Signetti getting Aiden Fisher over from James Madison. They also had Jalen Walker, who had a really good year, had less fanfare, but he was an all Big Ten player. Very solid season. And D'Angelo Pons is just insane. I mean, if anybody saw the 2 interception game that he had against Washington, people know that this guy is going to be playing on Sundays. If he stays healthy, I mean, he's a problem. When he transferred from James Madison, I mean, there was a lot of teams that wanted him, which is the funniest thing, too, because when you look at a lot of the guys that Indiana brought into the portal, and people are talking about that they're no good, because they're from the Sun Belt and the MAC and places like that. What matters more so than where a player came from is when that guy does enter the portal, how many teams want that player. That's what matters. And some of these guys like D'Angelo Pons, he was coveted by a lot of good teams, and even in the SEC. And when he announced he's going to IU, some people were surprised because they're like, I don't see this guy going, to Indiana. I mean, Kurt Cignetti was his coach, James Madison, but I mean, he's going to go where, more money is. Well, he goes to Indiana, has a stellar season, and now, I mean, he's possibly going to be a top draft pick next year. Now, hopefully he doesn't leave, but I don't see him leaving. I mean, Indiana's NIL is going up. Indiana is going up in a lot of categories. I don't see him leaving. And he seems dedicated to his coach in Cignetti. I don't see it. And you also look at a guy like Carter Smith, who entered the portal this past offseason, who played for Indiana last year. Teams like A&M and Ole Miss were wanting him. So, like I said, Indiana is having success bringing in guys from smaller schools, but they're guys that other teams want. Teams that are historically way better than Indiana, teams that historically have more money than Indiana, and Indiana's winning in these recruitments. And I think that says a lot. But Indiana don't normally have All-American players. I mean, that just doesn't happen. I mean, Penix would have gotten a lot more recognition in Indiana, but he never stayed healthy because of bad O-line play. But, I mean, other than Penix, I mean, McFadden was great, but, people just don't look at IU players like All-American. Like, Indiana has several All-Americans, tons of all Big Ten players. I think this has to be a record. I mean, I'd have to go back and look at every season in Indiana football history because, honestly, I have not. I'd have to go back and look. But I don't think Indiana's had this many all Big Ten players and this many All-Americans in the same season. This has to be a record on top of all the other records that Curt Cignetti has set with this team this year. I mean, we went through all the records earlier in the year, even posted a video on that as well on the channel. So definitely appreciate if you guys want to go check out that video from a while back to showcase all the records that have been broken. I mean, I know Indiana has had a bad football history, so that's why this good of a season has allowed Indiana to break so many great records. Unlike a team like Alabama, who's broken so many records already, it's almost impossible for them to break so many more records, right? And especially in the same season. But I still think it's just impressive that Indiana has broken all these records. And these All-American players are a massively good look for IU, because now that these guys have had success and Cignetti staying in Indiana for the long haul, players are going to be like, you know what? I want to go to Indiana. Like, I'm a group of 5 guy. I might not be a guy that too many schools want as of now, but like I go to IU and I develop, I get a whole lot better. Well, I'm going to be playing on Sundays because trust me, some of these guys are going to be playing on Sundays. Now, doesn't mean that they're going to be having tons of success or anything. I mean, you can be a really good player in college, go pro, and not have a whole lot of success. But I think some of these guys will. I think Mikel Kamara is going to make a difference in the NFL. I think Curtis Wark will at probably best be a backup, and at worst a practice squad player in the NFL, but that's still a good look. I think Aiden Fisher, D'Angelo Pons for next year, I think they'll be NFL guys. A lot of players for Indiana that are going to be playing in the NFL, I think, after this season, and that's going to help Cignetti as well be able to say, you know what, this is a program where we develop guys for the NFL as well as having success in college, and you also make a good bit of money in NIL too. So there's definitely a lot to like about Indiana in the future. And Cignetti is definitely spearheading that, and these players having success is a great look. And that translates to transfer portal additions, because Indiana has had some transfer portal additions. I still do not agree with the portal being open right now. A lot of people know the way I feel about that. I've said for a long time that the portal should open after the bowls end. But I've talked to a lot of people as well that have said that you can't do that because of the way the schools work, where the universities, like the next semester starts in early January, which is fair, coming off Christmas and New Year's, that you can't do that. It's going to mess with their, eligibility for that school. I get all that, but I mean, that just seems like, you know what, like you've opened a can of worms. You can't put the can back in, or the worms back in the can. You just can't do it. So you allow the portal to be free reign and open right now. And that's why the bowl games are so messed up. I mean, you think about, like, now they're playing bowl games right now. I mean, we're not even close to Christmas. I remember when bowl games would start on, like, the 20th or whatever, and now we're already having bowl games, but there's still guys already in the portal. And you can't blame those guys because they want to leave that team that they're currently at and don't want to be on that team anymore. They want to go to another team where they can either get playing time or more NIL, whatever the reason is for them transferring, and they want to get a head start before everybody else. Because if everybody's jumping into the portal at the exact same time, then guess what? I mean, it's a deal where, oh, if that guy enters the portal first and I enter the portal later, then that team already takes that player. I can't go to that school that might have wanted me or might have needed me, if I entered the portal a week earlier than I would have. So it's just a catch-22. It sucks for bowls. It sucks for people's enjoyment of, the bowl games and all these type of events late in the season because, I mean, with so many opt-outs, the bowl games just kind of stink. They're nowhere near as fun, but you can't blame the players. I understand why they want to leave. I get the draft guys. I get if you're going to be a first-round draft pick and your team's in a bowl game, I get why you don't want to play. You don't want to get hurt and potentially lose millions of dollars in the NFL because you get hurt. I get it. But unfortunately, when out at the portal, it just makes it a whole lot worse because most teams that are in bowl games, they're the inferior ones. They're not in the playoffs, so they're probably going to only have it at the most like a couple, maybe three or four draft guys that opt out. But then you got the portal, especially if their coach got fired, and the team's got 25 players transferring out. Yeah, that's really good for your team when you've only got like 50 players left and you're going up against another team that's got 75 players left. It's a mess. It's a mess. It definitely ruins bowl season. But to get back on track, it is good for IU and other programs that are having success, and they need players because Indiana already has 6 guys transferring in, and none of them jump off the page. None of them do. But guess what? None of them really did last year either, and look what Indiana's season turned out to be this year. They were fantastic, so I'm not worried about it. I know a lot of these guys aren't big names, but Cignetti knows what he's doing. You got to give him the benefit of the doubt after the fantastic season he's had that he knows what type of players to bring in. Now, if they bomb out and they don't do well this year, then you have to reevaluate. Like maybe, Cignetti is really going to have to up his high school recruitment game to be able to build a foundation because you can't just rely on the portal like Florida State, but I still think that's the way to go. And I think Cignetti does believe that too because as you can see, done a really good job bringing in a lot of high school players, 21 guys, decently rated class for Indiana standards. I know some people were hoping it'd be better. But still, I mean, it's just so tough to get highly rated classes when you're going up against those SEC schools. That's the thing. All things considered, Indiana's done pretty well. But looking at who they brought in, it's all group of 5 guys outside of one guy from UCF, and he's a punter. UCF's not group of 5 anymore. They're in the Big 12. But you got Mitch McCarthy at punter. You got a kicker as well, Brendan Frank from Texas State, going to Indiana. That's big because unfortunately Indiana is losing James Evans, their star punter from this season, to eligibility. He's out of eligibility. They needed a punter. It's hard to recruit a punter. So they brought in a punter from UCF, and his stats are pretty good. So that's a big addition. And at kicker, Indiana's losing a kicker, so they need to bring in another kicker. Cignetti's on top of special teams. And then you look at some of the other additions. They got Amari and Knighton from Northern Illinois, cornerback. He had good stats. He was being recruited by some Power 4 schools. Not that many, but definitely a guy with potential. Lee Beebe Jr., running back from UAB. It was a whole mess with him, which the portal's a whole mess anyways, and not surprising. But where he committed to IU a couple days ago, then there was rumors that, his agents told him to keep his recruitment open, presumably to see if he can land a better offer from another team. But then Beebe comes out today saying that he is committed to IU. He's not going anywhere else. So I don't know what's up with that deal. But Beebe's going to IU, and that's a big addition because Indiana's losing a couple running backs this year in Justice Ellison and Tyson Walton. They're 2 main running backs that they brought into the portal this year. They are out of eligibility after the college football playoff ends. And they did lose Elijah Green to the portal with tough blows. I thought Elijah Green was going to have a bigger role next year, but he's leaving. So you have Kalen Black at running back coming back, and you have a couple of freshmen. Other than that, Indiana's running back room is very thin. So I think that he's probably going to bring in another running back. I don't think Beebe's going to be the only one. I think they're going to get somebody else too in the portal, probably bring in a couple running backs. But Beebe was being recruited by a lot of Power 4 schools, and his stats were very good at UAB, had around 1,000 yards, and was one of the better rated running backs in college football by Pro Football Focus, which is a site that does a lot of analytics for players and ranks them based on their play. So I think that Lee Beebe is going to be a major asset next year for Indiana. Could be the lead back. unless Cignetti can bring in another running back that's even better. Only time will tell. But the fact that he was being pursued by so many other power conference teams, and the fact that it looked like his agents were trying to make him keep his recruitment open to maybe get a better offer, kind of showcases this guy is good. So I think that he's going to be a big asset for IU next year. Also, that he is not going to another program and he is staying committed to Indiana. And then also, and this is as of now, next week when we do another edition of Hoosiers Live, hopefully it's happy week with Indiana beating Notre Dame, but we're going to get to that in a minute. But we're going to have a lot more transfer portal news by next week, probably many more additions for IU. But so far, these are the last two guys that Indiana's got, 2 defensive linemen, which is also big because Indiana's losing C.J. West and James Carpenter to eligibility. Both were key players for Indiana this season. Both had great seasons, and they're gone out of eligibility. So they're bringing in Jose Wheeler from Western Kentucky. He had a good season last year for the Hilltoppers. And then Dominique Ratcliffe, defensive lineman from Texas State. Both guys were being recruited somewhat by power conference schools. And I keep saying that because I know that a lot of people are looking at these stars on these players. They're seeing 3 stars, and they're like, yeah, these players aren't that good. But you got to look at the players that Indiana was bringing in this past cycle, like Mikael Kamara and Curtis Work. Curtis Work was barely a 4-star transfer. Most of the other guys were 3-star transfers, and some weren't even rated. So like I said, I'm giving Cignetti the benefit of the doubt with these additions that he knows what he's doing. Like, he knows which players to bring in. Until proven otherwise, if these guys bomb out and they don't do well, then we'll, again, have to reevaluate our thinking on that. But I just think based on what he's done this year, you got to give him the benefit of the doubt with these guys that they're going to seamlessly translate into the team and have success. The only thing I'm a little worried about is that this year he did rely so heavily on James Madison players, guys that he already knew, guys that he already coached, and they just came over. That now you're going with guys from other schools that he has had no prior history with or of coaching. That could be a little bit different, so we'll see. But I do like the fact that these guys were all being recruited by bigger schools, so that means that they are quality players enough, or you wouldn't be having teams like Auburn and Texas A&M wanting these guys. And I think it's big, too, that he's getting the trenches figured out. He's getting 2 big defensive linemen to replace 2 that he's lost, might even get another one. And next, I think he's going to go after O-line. He's going to go after O-line because, yeah, they've lost. You know, they're going to lose a couple offensive linemen from this year to eligibility. So he'll probably bring in a couple of those because you want to have a deep offensive line and a deep defensive line. That's what actually a lot of people were worried about at the beginning of the season, because even though people are like, yeah, I think Indiana's offensive line is pretty good, it's not deep. It is not a deep offensive line. So that is something to monitor for next season, especially after this offseason is complete. Does Indiana have a deeper offensive line? Thankfully, Indiana's offensive line stayed mostly healthy this year. Had a couple injuries, though, to Nick Kidwell at the beginning of the season, Drew Evans later on. But Indiana really didn't have to force their hand and get deep into the depth of the offensive line, which is something you don't want to do. But you still want to have a lot of depth there regardless if you want to go up against the best of college football who have tons more depth. And then after that, go after the skill position guys. Those guys, you don't want to say they're a dime a dozen, but they kind of are. Like wide receivers, maybe you need a receiver. Maybe you need a guy, a slot receiver. There's tons of slot receivers. You want to get those D linemen and those O linemen done first. You don't want to be at the end where you've gotten your quarterback, you've gotten your running back, you've gotten all these players, and then you got that big gaping hole at center and that big gaping hole at right guard. You just don't want that. You want to get those guys sorted out of the way first, and then you can kind of breathe a sigh of relief and now we can look at the running backs and receivers where, like I said, you're going to have tons of those guys in the portal. IU still needs a quarterback probably. You're losing Curtis Work, Taven Jackson. We don't know what's going to happen with him. He's kind of in that floaty position where it's like, will he be the starting quarterback next year? Will Kurt Cignetti bring in somebody that's way better than him? And then Taven Jackson transfers. So he's on the fence. We'll have to see. Tyler Cherry could start. Tyler Cherry, very talented guy last year in the 2023 recruiting, or 2024 rather, recruiting class. He was a 4-star guy that was committed to Duke, decommitted, went to IU. When Cignetti got hired, could he be the guy? It's a lot of questions at quarterback, but before all that matters, you got to get the trenches done. And the D-line getting 2 big additions, I think, is huge. I'm liking Indiana's class so far. I mean, the transfer class is rated number 30 right now. The whole class is rated at like 46. I mean, it's not terrible. It's not terrible. You get a few more high-quality transfers. Indiana can have a top 40 class. But the biggest thing is that all these guys, and what Cignetti has preached over and over again, it's production over potential. Some of these guys do have some potential, but the production's already there. Cignetti wants guys that are already good, like on paper. Like the stats are already there. Like you're bringing in Lee Beebe, who had 1,000 yards last year at UAB. You're bringing in Dominic Ratcliffe and Jose Wheeler, two guys that were all conference players in their respective conferences and had, like 80 tackles last year. Guys that just put up stats that have proven that they can win at a lower level. And all Cignetti has to do is be able to get them to win at a higher level. It's not as hard as it seems. It is hard, but it's not. Because if you give a guy like Lee Beebe confidence, like, you know what? You had tons of success at UAB. Why can't you do it in the Big Ten with a better offensive line to run behind, a better quarterback next to you? It can be done. So I like Cignetti, his ways of being able to bring in transfer guys, not just going after the highest rated guys that he can go after, because that's what a lot of teams do. They see a guy that's a 5-star rated transfer, kind of like an Eric Gilbert, who was at Georgia. And then he goes to Nebraska. He was a 5-star tight end. I'm sure some of you probably remember him. Didn't do anything in Nebraska this past year. Now he's on the move again. Like, just because he was highly rated and had so much potential doesn't mean it's going to work out. Sometimes it does. But sometimes you just want to bring in guys that you've already seen on film that this guy can play, even if he's not highly regarded. That's the Cignetti way. That's the Cignetti strategy. And until it doesn't work, you got to keep assuming that it's going to happen. It's going to work. So definitely excited about these players that Indiana is bringing in for next season. Definitely off to a good start in the portal. But definitely appreciate you guys for being here. We're about to get into the Indiana-Notre Dame prediction. If you are enjoying the show, like the stream down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We got to bring in more Hoosier fans to Indiana at the voice of college football. We're here every Tuesday night talking about IU football, breaking down their upcoming games, talking about news when it comes to the portal, talking about, coaching news, all this kind of stuff with Indiana football. You're not going to want to miss it. This is the place to be for Indiana football coverage. Might even have some basketball coverage in the offseason. I have no idea. Definitely got a lot of stuff we're going to have down the pike, but tons of Indiana football content coming on the way. Definitely appreciate if you guys do subscribe and leave a like down below and share the stream on social media. Get more Hoosier fans and college football fans here. We got to talk about Indiana and Notre Dame, the CFP game. That's right. We're not talking about a non-conference game. We're talking about the college football playoff. Indiana's in the college football playoff. As you can see on screen, 29% chance to win according to I guess that's either ESPN's FBI predictor or it could be Google's probability. I'm not exactly sure. But regardless, Indiana is being given roughly a 1/3 chance to win. Notre Dame's favored by about 8. Both teams have had some injuries. Indiana's been the healthier team all year. But Notre Dame has been getting healthier as time has gone on because they had a couple of injured offensive linemen. Those guys have gotten more healthy as the season's gone along, especially I think they've gotten a couple guys back just this week. But they do still have a few guys out. So, like I said, not as healthy as Indiana. Still relatively healthy overall. Looking at Notre Dame's team, it's going to be really interesting to see how Indiana matches up with Notre Dame. Because the one thing Indiana has not really faced this season with any team that they have played is a quarterback with the ability to run. And not just an ability to run, but an ability to control the game with his legs if the defense can't stop it. Riley Leonard at quarterback is not a premier passer. He is not an elite passer at all, and that is the only reason why he is still in college football. He's a good player. Very good player. I like Riley Leonard's game, and I think he can have an NFL future, but he's definitely going to have to get better as a passer. Because when you look at his stats, 194 of 293 for 2,092 yards and a 66.2% completion percentage, you're like, wow, that's pretty good. All those stats are good. But then you look at that average of 7.1 yard a throw, and it's like, yeah, most of his throws are pretty short. He's not a deep ball passer at all, which, again, if you're going to be an NFL quarterback, you got to be able to make deep throws. And Riley Leonard's got a big body. You would assume he's got a big arm. I don't know necessarily if it's not that he has a big arm. It's just the fact that he's not that accurate downfield. I don't know. It's a lot of question marks there. 16 touchdowns and 5 picks. So that's pretty good overall. But then when you look at the ground game, and that's where Riley Leonard picks up the slack. He's the second leading rusher on the team. And Notre Dame has two very good running backs in Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. But Riley Leonard is above Price in yards, 124 carries, 721 yards, and he's got 14 total touchdowns on the ground. I mean, he's almost got more rushing touchdowns than passing touchdowns. That kind of tells you everything you need to know about Riley Leonard. I mean, he could have a game against Indiana in the playoff game where he's like 16 of 24 for 120 passing yards, no touchdowns, no picks, and then 15 carries, 110 rushing yards, and 3 rushing touchdowns. And if he has a game like that, Indiana's probably losing the game. Like, they're going to have to contain Riley Leonard's legs. The problem is that Notre Dame's got 2 great running backs in Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. So if you try to shut down Riley Leonard, you got to worry about the other 2 running backs. The thing that has been really good for Indiana this season is that their run defense has been great. It's been one of the best in college football. But then you start looking at the teams they played, and you start looking at the strength of schedule and the tight teams that they played and the offenses that they deployed. And it starts to kind of show that maybe Indiana's run defense was very good because they didn't really face many teams that would actually put pressure on that run defense. They didn't really face any quarterbacks that could run. I mean, the team that they faced that probably had the best running quarterback was probably Northwestern, Jake Loesch, a guy that most people don't even know. He ran a little bit on Indiana. I mean, not a lot, but I think he had like 40 rushing yards on like 5 or 6 carries. So it had some success against Indiana. Like Michigan, you had Davis Warren in the game. He's not a threat to run. Will Howard at Ohio State's not a threat to run. I mean, Aiden Childs, Dylan Raiola, they're athletes a little bit, but, in some regards, but they're more like, okay, we can extend plays in the pocket kind of guys versus we run. So Indiana didn't really have to face that. And then you look at the fact that it's a 3-headed monster. I mean, it's not just one good back. Like Washington had a good running back in Jonah Coleman. He's good. And then you look at Michigan, Kalel Mullings. He's a good back, probably going to be an NFL guy. But that's one guy you're having to stop. It's one player. Whereas Notre Dame's got 3. No team has been able to stop Notre Dame's run game. None. I mean, Northern Illinois beat them. But I think it was more so because Notre Dame just kind of sucked in the game. And a lot of people complain with the play calling down the stretch. Notre Dame kind of got away from the run game. Notre Dame at no point in this game should get away from the run game unless they're down big against IU, which I don't think anybody is anticipating that to ever be the case in this game. If Indiana is up 21-0 or something like that, something went horribly wrong. Must have been a couple turnovers. I don't know. But that's going to be a thing to watch for Notre Dame. As long as they are tied or winning or even slightly down against Indiana, Notre Dame does not need to abandon the run. That is their bread and butter. That's where they make their living on the field. And they don't need to deviate from that play calling. If they don't, then I think Notre Dame will be able to run the ball very well against Indiana, despite Indiana having a good run defense. The question is how well Indiana stops it. Because if they can stop Notre Dame's run game just enough, they don't have to eliminate it because they're not going to. But if they can slow it down just enough, then you have to force Riley Leonard into passing situations more often. And that's where he can maybe throw a pick. Because he hasn't had to throw all season long in dangerous situations. I mean, they've been blowing out teams most of the time, kind of like Indiana. Like I said, their seasons are very similar, Indiana and Notre Dame's. The only difference is Notre Dame lost to a bad team. Indiana lost to a really good team. But their seasons are very similar. All their wins are basically against nobody teams. Notre Dame's best wins over A&M and Indiana's best wins over Michigan. Other than that, neither team really has any good wins. So that's interesting there. You look at Notre Dame's passing game, and because Riley Leonard doesn't throw that much, none of these guys have a lot of yards. Bo Collins, transfer from Clemson, he's a decent receiver. Mitchell Evans is a good tight end, but they just do not get a whole lot of opportunities in the passing game because Notre Dame's offense is not passing oriented. And then you look at Notre Dame's defense, it's good. They got really good players, very stacked across the board. You don't see a guy with high, tackle totals. Like Jack Kaiser's their best, guy in the tackle department with 64. But they just got a whole host of guys that are really good at defense. And it's going to be interesting if they can get to Curtis Rourke. If they can get to Curtis Rourke, then Indiana probably has no shot to win. You saw against Ohio State, Indiana could not protect Rourke. It doesn't mean that Indiana's offensive linemen are bad because they've been really good all season long. But the problem is that when you're playing against a team that has one of the best defensive lines in the country, like Michigan, and Ohio State's is really good too, and Notre Dame's isn't that far off, yeah, even a decent to good offensive line, which I think Indiana has this year, I would say it's good. I think it's a good offensive line. You're not going to stop that D-line. So Notre Dame's, their recipe to win is they got it to pressure Rourke and force him into mistakes, force him onto the ground, make him uncomfortable and rattled. I don't even think they have to stop Indiana's run game all that much. I mean, they can't let Indiana gash them, but it's kind of like the Ohio State game. Indiana ran the ball decently well against Ohio State, but because Indiana fell behind, then Indiana had to throw, and it forced them into passing situations every single time. So even if Indiana's having some success on Notre Dame on the ground, as long as Notre Dame can get a lead, it's not going to matter because Indiana is not going to be able to run the ball to come back. So I don't think Indiana's run game going to make a massive difference in this game. I just think Indiana's run game has to keep them honest, Notre Dame's defense honest, but it's more going to come down to Indiana's passing attack. Can they hold up against Notre Dame's D-line, and can Indiana slow down Notre Dame's run game at all? If they can slow them down at all and force Riley Leonard to throw some, I think there's a shot. But if not, it's probably lights out. And then you got to factor the crowd. Notre Dame at night. A lot of people are talking about the Indiana effect, though. Maybe there's a lot of Hoosier fans in the stands. They are buying those expensive tickets. There seems to be a lot of hype that there will be a Hoosier presence in the stadium. But even if there is, the crowd's still going to be way more Notre Dame. Probably 85-15 at worst and probably 95-5 at best. So Notre Dame's going to have a massive fan advantage. It's at night. It's going to be cold. It's going to be hard for Indiana to win this game. There's a shot because Indiana lost to Ohio State. And Indiana made a lot of mistakes in that game, and there were a couple bad calls by the refs in that game that really blew that game open. And Indiana lost by a lot more than the score actually should have indicated based on the way the game played out. Indiana was a lot more competitive in that game. Notre Dame, on paper, is not as good of a team as Ohio State. They're not as good of a team. They are really good. Really, really good. Got good defensive players, got good offensive players, but their receiving room is weaker than Ohio State. Their quarterback's not as good of a passer. There's weaknesses to Notre Dame, but the problem is that Notre Dame's strengths are so good. And Indiana doesn't really have any weaknesses, but when they've played great D-lines, the O-line can break down, so it's still a bit of an issue. And like I said, the only time Indiana went on the road in a really tough environment, they struggled at Ohio State, made a lot of mistakes. And this game's going to be at night, too. I mean, Indiana really hasn't gone on the road at night and faced a tough atmosphere. I mean, they went on the road at UCLA at night, but UCLA was not very good, especially at the beginning of the season. And there were more Indiana fans there than UCLA. So, with all that being said, who am I predicting to win this game? I don't think I can pick Indiana. I want to pick Indiana, obviously. You know, I'm a fan. I'm hosting the Indiana channel. I want Indiana to win. But I realistically, can't let my bias overcome and pick Indiana to win. Can they win? Absolutely. Will they win? Most likely not. It doesn't mean that they can't, but I do think Notre Dame will win this game 31-21. I think Indiana keeps it close. I think that they will fight and they'll hang around. But I do think in the fourth quarter, Notre Dame's run game's going to start getting much more big gains than they were earlier in the game. Indiana's defense is going to get very tired. And I think that Notre Dame, as the game goes on, will wear Indiana's offensive line down, and they'll start to get to work. Because you saw in the Michigan game, Indiana started out well in that game. And then in the second half, Michigan's D-line just started to beat down Indiana's offensive line, got Rourke on the ground, and Indiana's offense ground to a halt. I mean, it could be a deal where Indiana maybe is winning 21-13 or 21-14, something like that. In the third quarter, you think Indiana's got the game, but then it's just the game goes on. Notre Dame's talent and their depth and their just advantage and all across the board. And being at home, it's going to wear IU out, and Indiana is going to end up falling short. I mean, the talent gap is wide in this game, but it's not insurmountable. So Indiana does have a chance. And there will be some people that do pick Indiana to win. And I've been high on Indiana since the beginning. I picked them to go 7-5 this year when most people were picking them to do nothing. You can go 4-8. So I've been backing IU all season. I've picked them to win every game except Ohio State. I even picked them against Michigan. So on my picks, I've gone 11-1 this year, same as their record. And I want to pick them so bad. If this game was at Indiana, I maybe would do it. It would be close. I maybe would do it, but it's at Notre Dame. I just think everything's kind of just a little bit too much stacked against them. And I do think the Fighting Irish will get the dub. It's going to be a good game, though. I think this game is going to show that Indiana wasn't a fluke, that they were good, and they're not going to get exposed or destroyed or whatever. And I think this game's also going to show that Notre Dame is a really good team, too. Yeah, they had the one bad slip up against Northern Illinois, but they've had a really good year. I think it's going to make Freeman look good and going to set up a massive showdown between Notre Dame and Georgia, where if Notre Dame can win that game, that's going to really make Notre Dame look good and boost their team, a team that hasn't won a lot since the 90s. They have really struggled to win big games, especially late in the season and bowl games and stuff like that. Notre Dame's really struggled. So it'd be big for their program. And for Indiana, if they do lose, they're going to have to go back to the, drawing board for next year. Got to start all over again. This was a magical season. But Cignetti, he's not bolting to another program. He's in it for the long haul. He's made that very clear that he's staying at IU, signing that contract extension, and we'll have to see what he does next. You don't want this to be a one-hit wonder. You do not want that to happen. You want to build IU up into a consistent winner, and hopefully they will be able to do that for next season and beyond, that this will not be a one-hit wonder. But definitely appreciate you guys for being here. This has been a fun show. You guys always make it great. I'm definitely going to read your comments before I get out of here, but do appreciate you guys being here. If you're new, like the stream down below, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a future stream. We got tons more streams coming down the pipe for Indiana. Hopefully next season, we're still talking about this season, for next week. Like we want to talk about IU winning against Notre Dame. We want a great result there. Hopefully that happens and we're able to talk about it next week. But if not, we'll already start to, talk about, like looking back at this season, the amazing season it was, the best season in Indiana history. And in the future, we're going to be talking about, the off season and getting prepared for next season. A long way to go with that. A lot of off season stuff to talk about. So definitely hope you guys are along for the ride with that. But we had Jax here tonight saying, "What's up, Hoosier Nation?" Appreciate that. The real MVP was here saying, "Congrats on having a great season. Kurt earned Coach of the Year. Playoff results shouldn't matter because nobody expected IU to be 11-1. Absolutely. Outbound said, "Hey, kid, just letting you know, Cignetti is an impressive coach. He will give his guys confidence in the Notre Dame team of 2012. I agree. Absolutely impressive. Outbound said, "Do you look at the comments?" I do. I usually sometimes do them during the show, but sometimes just kind of do them at the end, because of the fact that, to keep my thoughts in order, like on the show, to keep it going. But yeah, I do definitely read the comments. So hopefully you're still here, but appreciate you being here. So Notre Dame's keeping everyone on the roster. Absolutely. Jack says, "Tell your friends and family the magic Jeffrey brings on Hoosiers Live every Tuesday night and on the Alabama Collins Show." Really appreciate that. Jackson says, "Let's get Indiana, the voice of college football, to 1,000 subs." Absolutely. We need more Hoosier fans in the chat. Having a great crowd tonight. Appreciate you guys for being here. And we want more Hoosier fans to be showing up in future weeks. Got to let them know that we are here doing this every Tuesday night. So definitely tell Hoosier fans. If you're an IU fan in the chat, tell your family members, tell your friends, tell everybody about the show. Future IU shows coming up. You're not going to want to miss it. Letter B says, "I don't want other teams trash. I want guys who want a chance from lower level schools." Absolutely. And that's definitely what Cignetti's doing. He seems to be keeping that philosophy, not going for the big fish, going for some of these smaller guys that want to win. Arrow Guy 173 says, "Notre Dame here, Morrison out hurts a lot. Gray be targeted like he was at USC. Our line remains a big inconsistency. As a native Hoosier, I'll enjoy watching IU have a great run. Good luck." Appreciate that, Arrow Guy. I just hope it's a great game, regardless. Like, I hope it's a great game. It doesn't matter, if Notre Dame wins, fantastic for Notre Dame. Be happy for the Fighting Irish. Happy for my buddy Will. Notre Dame hasn't won a big game in a long time, but it would be so great for IU to get basically their biggest win in program history. It'd be insane. So definitely going to be exciting. Arrow Guy said, "Riley's definitely made some crazy things happen from Notre Dame perspective. There's more cartwheel into the line than we would like to see. Lapinella definitely triple threat with him and Price and Love." Absolutely. I mean, it's probably the best three-headed monster in the backfield of anybody in college football. I mean, I'd have to go across the board and look at that to back that up, but I don't really think there's a lot of competition for that. John Jacobs, appreciate your being here, says, "I'm an IU fan. I went to a couple games this year. Huge game for Cignetti. IU needs to redeem himself for the Ohio State loss." Absolutely. And it would get the mantra away that, that they're trash and overrated and that was just a fluke season. I mean, if they could get that big win over Notre Dame, even if they lose the next game to Georgia, and then next season have a really good year, I think that would get rid of the stigma that IU was a fluke. So that's what I'm hoping Indiana can do there. John Jacobs says that Notre Dame crowd is the bottom. This is an in-state game for IU. I mean, Notre Dame's crowd is not as good as Ohio State's. It's not going to be as big of a factor, but I do think Notre Dame fans will be pumped up, and it being at night is going to help a bit for them. So, but I agree with you. It's not the biggest factor in the game. Maybe would hurt toward the end, though, especially if Notre Dame starts to turn the game. Letter B says turnovers will decide the game. Absolutely. I mean, Indiana cannot turn it over. They made mistakes against Ohio State that cost them the game, and that one pick against Michigan almost blew that game. You cannot turn it over. Have to play a mistake-free game. You force Notre Dame into a couple turnovers, then Indiana will have a shot. Absolutely. John Jacobs says IU 24, Notre Dame 21. I mean, man, that would be a fantastic score. I mean, it doesn't matter, what score it is. It could be by 1 point. It doesn't matter if Indiana wins. Any win would be just massive. I mean, it would be the biggest win ever in the program's history. So that would be awesome. Letter B says can't stand Stefan's guards every time IU plays well gets diminished. Yeah, I mean that's just because Indiana's not a brand team. Unfortunately, I mean they just don't get the I don't know what you want to say. They don't get what other teams get. They just don't. I mean you're Texas A&M and you have bad season after bad season after bad season, but you're in the SEC, you got a lot of money, you've won big games before, I guess, like, okay, something like that, and then they finally win a big game. It's like, well, wow, they did it, they're legit. When Indiana does anything, they're no good. And I mean, that's fair. Indiana's got to prove that they can be consistently good. Tom Allen never did that. Can Cignetti do it? We'll have to see. And I hope that happens. I really, really hope that happens. And a win over Notre Dame would go a long way. I mean, I thought beating Michigan and just going, 11-1, 10-0 at the time would do it, but nope. I mean, that's the way the media is. Some of them can be brutal. They want more and more and more. They don't trust IU. They don't think they're any good yet, and that's fair, I guess. Indiana's been bad forever, but with how good they've been this season, it's just kind of hard to overlook all that just because of the logo on the helmet. Say, yeah, they're no good. I just don't really agree. Letter B says he's a Bama fan who's a pity IU fan. I mean, when you put it that way, I mean, it sounds like that's the case. I mean, I don't want to say that's the case completely, but I mean, it's not that far off. I mean, I've been an Alabama fan since I was like 3 or 4 years old. I've been watching them since like 2008, 2009. I'm watching IU a lot later. I mean, I do really, really love IU. I did watch the basketball team first and the football team, but I do want them to win. And I'm very happy what the program's doing with Curt Cignetti. I really hope they start having a lot of success. But, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny how you put that, though. But, I mean, ain't a lot of people that way. I mean, I know tons of people that are Georgia fans and Ohio State fans. Like, I know an Ohio State fan that likes Cincinnati. And he liked Cincinnati before Cincinnati was any good. So a lot of people do like teams that aren't as good. It's just they don't like admitting it because they want to root for a team that wins. I mean, I don't have that excuse, though. It's not like I was born and raised in Indiana and was an Indiana fan and then like, I just suddenly switched to Bama because I was sick of rooting for a losing team. It's the other way around. I'm an Alabama fan forever and always because I've been watching since childhood. But Indiana's a team that I started watching later because I just did. I wanted them to win. I like seeing bad teams win. So, I mean, that's just kind of how it works. I'm really disappointed I didn't pick IU. I know I wanted to. But, I mean, I had to realistically pick who I think's going to win. I don't know. I can't. I don't know. I couldn't pick them. I realistically could see them winning. But I don't pick with my bias. I can't do that. I don't do that because a lot of people do. Like for example, I mean, I can't say I pick with my bias, but like I picked Washington to win the national championship last year. I did do that. Penix was a big. I was like, I wanted them to win, but I mean, Michigan was a better team. I did think Washington could win, and they could have won, but they made mistakes. Michigan outmuscled them, whatever. But I normally don't pick that way. I mean, I did think Washington could win. I've just learned that in a game like this, you just can't pick with who you want to win. You can't do that. I want IU to win, and they can. And if they do win, I'll admit I was wrong. But they haven't done anything this season to really prove they could beat a team like this. I mean, Michigan's their best win, and they barely won. All their other wins are impressive. They've destroyed everybody, and I've backed that up to the hill with people saying, oh, well, they beat nobody. Well, they've beaten them by 40 and 50 points like Nebraska, Michigan State. Those are great wins. I think they're very impressive. The fact they beat Nebraska by 49, Ohio State won by 4, I've said that all year. I think it's massively impressive, but they have not beaten a team to this scale. And until they do that, it's very hard to really pick it to happen. It could. I hope it does. But we'll just have to see. Letter B says UCLA isn't a good win because they weren't good at that point in the year. Yeah, I mean, the narrative is dumb with that. I mean, UCLA got a whole lot better. I think people should judge teams by how they end up. It's like, oh, like Miami destroyed Florida at the beginning of the season. You know what I'm saying? Like, Florida's a lot better now. Miami probably doesn't even beat Florida right now. But Florida got destroyed at the beginning of the season to Miami because they didn't have their quarterback situation figured out. They weren't a good team. Then they got better. And now that they're playing, actually probably an above half level in the SEC, again, I think they could beat Miami. But people are like, oh, it was such a great win for Miami. Well, at the time, it wasn't. Florida wasn't good. So, like, Indiana beat UCLA at the beginning of the year when UCLA was pretty trash. But then, like, UCLA, gets better at the end, toward the end of the season, and I guess the win looks a little bit better. But I mean, I do think you kind of have to judge a team based on the way they played at the time. So it's kind of like Indiana, Michigan. I think Indiana could have beat Michigan probably by 21 at the beginning of the season, 14-21. But since they played later on in the year when Michigan started to improve, then guess what? Like Michigan almost beat them. Teams change as the season goes. Some teams get worse, some teams get better, but it is what it is. Letter B said Michigan beat us. They're 8-4. Washington beat us 7-5. Gonna be talking about it this way. I mean, yeah. I mean, again, everything's subjective or objective, however you want to say it. I mean, teams look a whole lot different with a couple wins and losses. If IU's 9-3 right now, the season would be nowhere near as special. Even though I still would think Cignetti would have done a great job. The only reason he's getting so much recognition is because they are 11-1. But regardless, hope they can beat Notre Dame. It's going to be a lot of fun to see what happens regardless, win or lose. Think Notre Dame's going to win, but I think IU's going to have a shot. And it's been a fantastic season. For all Hoosier fans out there, just relish in this season, even if it ends on Friday night. Season's almost over, but it's been a fantastic year and a season that I will never forget as long as I live. Because I don't know. I mean, we don't know if IU's going to have another season like this. It's been a great year, though. But appreciate everybody for being here. Like the stream down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Share the stream out on social media to Hoosier fans, non-Hoosier fans. Let's bring them to Indiana at the voice of college football. We got tons of more content coming down the pipe. Again, appreciate everyone for being here. Can't wait for the game on Friday night. And before we get out of here, we do have a word from our sponsor. But we got to always say, win or lose, go Hoosiers.
College football is even more exciting with some action on the line. And the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the voice of college football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Let's start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread. I've got a 40-year track record. In fact, in 2023, at $100 played per game, you would have netted over $9,300. And guess what? I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill, our ace in the hole, show stopper from Wager Talk. 6 years with the voice of college football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick, which went 21-5 against the spread the last 2 seasons. I repeat, 21-5 against the spread. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Steve Dace and Matt Zemek. Become a YouTube channel member or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2024 a winner now.